So again, welcome to our webinar on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant. Just wanted to let everybody know that we will be recording the presentation and group Q&A portion of this webinar so that we can put that on our website for future reference for those who can't make it today. If you prefer to not have your image recorded, feel free to leave your video off, or if you prefer to not be on record at being at this meeting, you're also welcome to exit and watch the recording later. My name is Julie Curdy. I'm the director of the Clean Energy team at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, or MAPC. We're the regional planning agency for the greater Boston region, serving the 101 cities and towns in and around Boston on clean energy and climate planning programs and implementation. So I'll give the first presentation today and start with a little bit of housekeeping. So we have this in a meeting mode rather than webinar mode to make it more interactive. So that requires a request of all of you. If you could please keep yourself on mute when you're not talking, that will help to ensure that we can hear all of the presenters. And since we have a big group today for the Q&A with the full group, we ask that you put your questions in the chat. You're welcome to put questions in as the presenters are speaking. And we have two of our team members at MAPC, Sasha Scheideroff and Francelis, who are going to grab those questions and put them into a document so we can pull them out and hopefully get to as many as we can during our open Q&A. And we'd also ask that you rename yourself in Zoom if you can, with your name and your organization and community and pronouns. So if you go to the upper right of your image on Zoom and click those three little dots, or if you right click on your name and hit more, if you could please just add your community to your Zoom name so we know where you're from, that will help everybody in the discussion that will happen later. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with two introductory polls that my colleague Brooks is going to pull up. And these are just to help us understand where folks are coming from today as we tailor our presentation to all of you. So if people want to take a moment to fill those out. All right. And we'll just share the results with everybody. Oh. Sorry, Brooks, do you want to just share the results? I think it's not quite working for me. Can folks see that? Okay.
I'm sharing them, and I think
you are sharing them. Okay, great. I'm having some Zoom difficulties. So it looks like we have great representation from municipal staff today. The majority of the folks in the webinar, as well as some clean energy committee members and sustainability committee members, and some partners in nonprofits in the building trades. And we're really excited to see municipal staff here, especially since this grant program is primarily for them to lead and apply to.
I'm sorry to barge in. We're having some sort of fire alarm going on, so I've been ordered to vacate.
Oh boy.
Hopefully I'll be back, but if not, I'll be back, but I'm not sure when. Let's put it that way. I apologize.
Okay, good luck. That's our Green Communities colleagues are all together in their building, and it sounds like they're getting booted out for a bit. But we'll be back to it. Just let us know. Otherwise, we'll adjust a little bit. So our agenda for today, we covered introductions and housekeeping. And the next portion, I'll provide an overview of the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant, mouthful, EECBG grant program for larger communities. So those with more than 35,000 residents that are eligible to receive formula funding under the program. When our colleagues from the Department of Energy Resources, DOER, come back, they'll provide an overview on the program for smaller communities, so those under 35,000. We'll have time for some moderated Q&A, and then we'll go into breakout room discussions to give you all time to talk to each other about your program ideas. And if the DOER colleagues are a little delayed in coming back, we'll just adjust that agenda a little bit to make sure that we can still cover everything. I also wanted to just note that MAPC, we are not experts in this program and we're not the federal administrators of this program. So our goal today is to share as much introductory information with you today based on publicly available information about this program. And we strongly encourage you, if you have any technical questions about the program, any questions about the application process, to please reach out to the Department of Energy directly with those questions. And we'll share their contact information later in the webinar. And they're also going to be doing a series of more in-depth webinars on the different program options I'll outline today. So there will be a lot more information and resources coming for you as well. So on the next slide is an overview of what the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Program is. This program, it's in its second iteration, and it came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And the program is designed to assist states, local governments, and tribal governments in implementing strategies to reduce energy use, reduce fossil fuel emissions, and improve energy efficiency. The program is open now through applications, and it's open through January 2024. So there's almost a full year for communities eligible for the formula funds to apply to the program. DOE encourages municipalities to work together on projects and programs to make the funding go further. And they also encourage funding for projects that advance energy equity in your communities. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. No cost match is required through this program, but leveraging funding is encouraged. And the program encourages using this funding as a seed investment to grow local capacity and build clean energy and energy efficiency programs. And this funding can be used over a 2-year period. There's no notice yet of any renewal of the funding. So as far as we know, this is a one-time 2-year program unless Congress chooses to reinvest in the future. The next slide covers eligibility for the funding. So for Massachusetts, more than $3 million in formula funding will flow to eligible municipalities. So those are municipalities with more than 35,000 residents. And most of our municipalities in that category are eligible for about $76,000, but the amount does scale up based on population. This is formula funding, so it's not competitive funding. So that means that eligible communities need to apply and meet the requirements, and they'll receive the funding to run their programs. And then in addition, the Department of Energy Resources has access to just about $2.5 million that they're going to apply for and tell you about later. And they're going to use that to administer funding to smaller municipalities, so those under $35,000. You can see on the right side of here, there's also a competitive program that DOE is formulating that was part of the legislation. So that will be funding that's for, again, communities that weren't eligible for the formula funds. And it's $8.8 million in total. That will be a nationwide competitive program to apply for funding. You'll probably recognize that's not a lot of money across the country. So I think we'll keep our eye on that program, but we're not sure if it will make sense for municipalities to apply for it necessarily, depending on where you might be. So if you go to the next slide, there's a whole bunch of eligible activities under this program that are bulleted out on the slide here. So to just highlight a few, developing and implementing an energy efficiency and conservation strategy is one possibility. Establishing financial incentive programs for energy efficiency improvements. If you're interested in source reduction, recycling, and content procurement programs that connect to energy efficiency, those are eligible. And new this year compared to the program that existed back under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, programs for financing energy efficiency, renewable energy, and zero emission transportation are also eligible, which is an exciting procurement opportunity there. DOE also strongly encourages teaming for these projects. If multiple municipalities eligible for formula funds want to come together and pool their resources, they can do so by putting together one application together. And that can allow them to enact more interesting programs with more funding. So an examples that DOE has provided is standing up an energy efficiency workforce training program, creating a low interest financing program for income qualified residents to access solar or other renewable technologies. And then one option we strongly encourage is that municipalities think about pooling resources to hire local staff. So a shared energy manager or sustainability manager across communities as well. And again, we'll have time in the breakout rooms to talk about this more. So on the next slide, we wanted to share and emphasize that the Department of Energy considers EECBG one of its Justice 40 programs. So Justice 40 is President Biden's goal that 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments in clean energy and climate flow to disadvantaged communities. That's a term the federal government is using, that for too long have faced disinvestment and underinvestment. So DOE has a working definition of what a disadvantaged community is. It's based on cumulative burdens and 36 different indicators they put together based on fossil fuel dependence, energy burden, communities facing environmental and climate hazards, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. It's a little bit small, and there is a mapping tool available as well to zoom in on the communities, but you can see on the right the map of federally identified Justice 40 communities in the MAPC region. We also wanted to emphasize, though, that Massachusetts has its own definition of what an environmental justice community is, which is the map on the left, which is a little more comprehensive in terms of communities that it covers. And our EJ definition is based on a mix of household income, the percentage of minority populations in a municipality in a census tract, and then households that speak English as their primary language or another language as their primary language. So the point, I guess, of showing both of these maps is we want to emphasize that even if you don't see your community on this map, you can and should still advance equity with your EECBG projects. And you can do this by focusing your projects on low-income households in your community, on English isolated households, and on communities of color in your municipality, whether or not they may fall on this map. So on the next slide, the Biden administration has outlined some Justice 40 policy priorities to kind of show what does it look like with the EECBG program to emphasize equity. So examples of this could be projects that would decrease energy burden for low-income households, decrease environmental exposure burdens, increase access to capital for clean energy and energy efficiency projects, programs that create workforce and job opportunities, good job opportunities, projects that increase energy resilience, and projects that increase energy democracy. And so there's more information from DOE on their website about Justice 40, but really wanted to emphasize this and encourage that this is a funding opportunity to really ensure that clean energy and energy efficiency investments flow to communities and populations in your community that may not typically have access to those resources. So on the next slide, there are two routes to apply for EECBG funding for communities in the formula category. There is a grant route and there is a voucher route. For the voucher route, the DOE is still actually defining what this will mean, and we expect more guidance to come out soon. They've scheduled a webinar for April 13th where they'll be providing more details on the voucher route. But what they've shared so far is they envision the voucher route as having more simplified options that a community can opt into. One of those routes will be accessing different technical assistance providers that we think DOE will be selecting. And those providers may provide support related to policy, planning, and program design for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and transportation. They will likely provide building retrofit program design, engineering and modeling services, and community and stakeholder engagement services. DOE also plans for the rebates to allow for energy-related equipment purchases and rebates. So purchasing equipment such as HVAC equipment, air source heat pumps, insulation, electric vehicles, and electric vehicle charging, renewable energy, electric system upgrades, etc. And DOE emphasized in their information that they strongly encourage the voucher route for communities with under 250,000 residents and or for those with limited internal staff or local capacity. It obviously is up to a community which route they might want to choose and what they might want to do with this funding, but they did design the voucher route to be a much lower administrative burden for a local government to administer. The other grant pathway or the other application pathway is pursuing a grant. And there's a whole bunch of information on how to pursue a grant available from the Department of Energy, including the different paperwork requirements. Pursuing a grant will provide more flexibility in how the funds can be used in your community. The trade-off, though, is that it's a more complex application, administrative burden, and reporting process. So communities can weigh the pros and cons of what fits best for them. And as some of the folks in the breakout rooms may want to share some of their past experience with federal grants that could be helpful for communities who are new to deciding which route they might want to take in this program. And so I also put on the slide that there's kind of two options within the grant that again are explained more in the funding announcement from DOE. Communities can apply for a grant that utilizes one of the Department of Energy's what they're calling blueprint topic areas, and those grants will be subject to expedited review and more DOE technical assistance. If a community chooses not to use one of the blueprint routes defined by DOE, their grant program could take longer to review, up to 90 days or more. And the blueprint topics are kind of outlines from DOE about how to create energy-related programs in key areas and some of the best practices and steps that they recommend. And they cover most of the major topics, so energy planning, energy efficiency, renewables, and transportation. And we expect that the blueprints will also be a resource for the voucher program route, and DOE will share more on that soon. So almost done. This is a mouthful. This is the light description of the grant, and we're very happy to answer questions afterwards. And again, DOE will be providing deeper dives depending on the pathway you might choose, voucher or grant. And I think also a webinar on the Justice 40 piece of this work. But the most important thing for you to know now is that by April 28th, every community that is eligible for formula funding, so that's every community in Massachusetts with more than 35,000 residents, needs to submit the pre-award information sheet. We have that linked on the slides that we'll send out afterwards. It's also readily available on DOE's website. This is a form that's about 10 pages long. If you know your community will choose the voucher route, you actually don't even need to fill out the whole form. You just need to fill out part of it. But we recommend you fill out the whole form if you're not sure. If you may pursue a grant or you may pursue a voucher and you're not sure yet. Picking voucher versus grant on this form does not obligate you to one pathway or another. You can choose once you apply for the full program what you may want to do. But again, by April 28th, so in a month and a half, please submit the pre-award information sheet to DOE. This is a critical step to ensure that you're eligible to apply for the funding. After you submit the pre-award sheet, though, you can see on the screen you have actually quite a lot of time to apply for the funding. There's different funding periods, 4 different application periods they've noted. So the first one ends April 28th, and then each period from there is about 2 months long. So you can pick what time to apply that's right for you. DOE has estimated, and they're going to try to commit to, but again, this is an estimate, that they'll process voucher applications within 30 to 60 days, grant applications that follow the blueprints in up to 60 days, and grants that do not follow the blueprints will take a minimum of 90 days to process. And that's if the grant application is complete. And then after they award the funding, again, communities have up to 2 years to use that funding. One other little nugget in the FOA, the funding announcement, is that every community, whether they use the voucher or the grant route, needs to develop an energy efficiency and conservation strategy, an EECS, and DOE has made a template available for this. The EECS outlines the goals in a community for energy efficiency and conservation, and it explains how the community will use the EECBG funding to help achieve that goal. It also asks communities to consider plans that adjacent local governments receiving EECBG funding are pursuing, and it asks them to describe how they plan to coordinate with the state to maximize benefits. So just wanted to flag that as well. You can fill out that form when you're applying for EECBG funding, or you can wait to up to a year after you have applied for the funding. The caveat is, I think if you wait the year until within the year period, the application plan becomes slightly more complex and a little more information is asked for at that point. But that's one other piece to flag for you all. The middle bullet on the slide also advises if you know you'll be applying for a grant, there are some administrative steps to take first that can take at least 1 month of lead time, which include registering in the federal system called SAMS, among others. And so we'll provide more information of that in the slides when we send out the link. But please know if you want to apply for a grant, get an early start ahead of your application deadline to ensure that you're all set up in the federal system, which can take 30 days or more. So my last slide is just to let you know, DOE just recently announced 3 more webinars that they'll be holding on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Program. So if you know your community will be pursuing a grant, or if you're not sure and are interested in learning more, there's a webinar about that on March 23rd. And maybe my colleagues, if you want to put the registration links in the chat to these webinars, and again, we'll also send out the slides soon after. DOE has a voucher program webinar on April 13th, where we're hoping to get more guidance on the voucher program, including the different uses for the vouchers. For example, we're not sure yet if they can be used to hire shared staff positions, but we really hope they will be able to. And then there is a technical assistance webinar on May 4th, just to hear about the different TA options that will be available via the program from DOE. I think those are all of my slides. So Joanne, are you all back? Did our DOER folks make it back?
Joanne, we see you.
I'm back.
Wonderful. Okay.
I left at a different time than they did, and I was able to sneak back on the elevator quickly when it was deemed to be a false alarm. So I don't know if they're back yet, but I got a text from Mark saying he was listening in on his phone. So hopefully they're making their way back.
Great. Well, then I think for the next part of our program, we'll switch over to a presentation from Joanne on the program for communities under 35,000 that the Department of Energy Resources will administer, and they're thinking about that now, so can share some of their program formulation thoughts. And then again, we'll have a small group breakouts to share feedback with them as well. So I'll turn it over to Joanne.
Am I sharing my slides?
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, hang on. I think we practiced this before, I remember, right? All right, we want to. How about now?
They're not in presentation mode yet, but we can see your screen. And this is your presenter screen. So I think we just need to see the other.
All right, we did it before, right? Do a new share, maybe that'll help. How about this one? Same?
We're seeing the same thing, Joanne.
Oh, man, all right. I apologize. We did practice this, but for bearing with me, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about the EECBG sub-grant program, which DOER will have the pleasure of administering. So what, oh man, now it's not advancing. There we go. All right. So we heard about the allocations for the direct grants for the communities with populations 35,000 or larger. The state also gets an allocation to distribute to the smaller communities. And that is what we're getting, a little under 2.5 million. And for those of you who have been around for the last iteration of these grants, it was over $12 million. So it's a much smaller scale. We're just setting expectations here. We have 3 years to expend these funds. We're also obligated to disperse at least 60% of this 2.5 million as subgrants. We most likely will retain up to 10% for administrative costs to help administer the program and whatnot. But our goal is to get as much of this funding out to communities and helping communities as possible. And I apologize if Julie's presentation mentioned this. The direct grants range from 76,000 to 690,000, which is Boston's allocation. And the average is a little over 100,000. So again, trying to set expectations. And one of our goals for the subgrant is to maximize the grant awards and minimize the reporting burdens and administrative burdens, both on our end as well as the community's end as grantees. So our goal is to target a subgrant program that meets your needs and trying to scale it, relative to the direct grants. We're eyeballing something in the $30,000 to $50,000 range. This is all based on preliminary, team discussions, nothing's etched in stone. And one of the reasons we're excited about this webinar is to hear from you folks on what you need. This is directly from the EECBG webpage. And again, if Julie went over it, I apologize. It's the same pretty much as it was from a dozen years ago, except that they added item number 14, which is EV infrastructure. So as you can see, it's a pretty broad base of activities and programs that are eligible, whether it's hiring consultants to help develop an energy efficiency plan, or hiring a consultant to do some additional engineering, working with community groups. They even have recycling in there, which is item number 10. So again, it's pretty broad. We don't envision in the sub-grants offering a full suite of activities. We want to find out what you folks need and how to best leverage other sources of funding and programs that are out there. So some ideas we've had, one which we're particularly excited about is to match the cost share that communities are obliged to pay if they intend to go through a Mass Save Deep Energy Retrofit study. And I'm going to do a quick digression of a commercial for a Deep Energy Retrofit program, because this is a new program rolled out by the Mass Save program this year. And it's really targeting buildings with high bills, old HVAC equipment, buildings that aren't right now in their Mass Save pathway of renovations. And it's really targeting an energy reduction of at least, greenhouse gas reduction of at least 40%. So these are, certain buildings that are targeted for this. And it's essentially a partnership with the Mass Save program that starts out with a scoping study. And then the scoping study is free. And then if after that study, it's determined that a detailed engineering study is warranted to move further, this is where the 50% copay comes in. And here's a detailed slide of what it is. And what we're talking about is the detailed engineering study. And it seems like those costs would be in the $20,000 to $40,000 range, depending on the building and scope and so forth. And we really think, particularly for, if you think about municipal and school buildings and the building stock that communities have, you want to keep the building, but you need to do a deep energy retrofit. This is a good option. So I think we're excited about being able to provide that cost share on behalf of the communities. So you get the engineering done and then you get the final project going. Okay, enough of that commercial. Next, barrier mitigation to electrification. In particular, if you need to upgrade electrical service to your building or facility, if you want to put in heat pumps, etc., that's something we thought about. If you are looking for a decarbonization roadmap for municipal facilities, those of you that are green communities may recall doing an energy reduction plan many moons ago. So it might be time to do a greenhouse gas reduction plan or decarbonization plan. So perhaps that's something we're interested in. Now that municipalities are eligible for getting the tax credit, although we don't know how yet, but it's eligible through the Inflation Reduction Act, there may be some interest in some rooftop solar. So perhaps the money can be used to buy that down for solar that is owned by the municipality. Again, building electrification, you see a theme here. Unless we're told otherwise, I'm a big fan of stacking grants. So you could stack, utility incentives are grants, other funding resources, provided they're not federal, with these grants. as Julie mentioned, there is a strong Justice 40 component of this, and I think communities that are interested in working with community-based organizations or other nonprofits to do clean energy engagement in their communities, that might be a good way to spend this money. Partnering with your neighbors and hire a regional energy manager to help do all this. And then, any other ideas. These are just some ideas that we've had kicking around the team. Again, with our timeline, it's somewhat similar to what Julie just outlined for the direct grants. We want to issue a RFI, request for information, or a survey even, for those of you that aren't on this webinar or think of something tomorrow, just to solicit a little more formally and widespread of what communities are interested in. We too have that April 28th deadline of the pre-award info sheet. And we have until July 31st to submit a full application to DOE. So we're on a little different timeline than the direct grants for municipalities. We also have to do an energy efficiency conservation strategy. And within that, we have to talk about how we're providing the subgrants to local governments and how we're going to, what the process is. They say on or about 90 days after the application, or at least 90 days, they will let us know if they're going to award us a grant. And then we anticipate it, this time next year, we could be issuing a application for these subgrants, with the caveat that some of these things are not in our control. But in terms of project planning and, thinking ahead, this is sort of the timeline that we should keep in mind. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thanks so much, Joanne. I think we probably have time for just a few questions. We've been trying to answer most in the chat as we go, though it can get a little chaotic trying to do that. Brooks or Sasha, do you see any questions in the chat, or Francelis, that you'd want us to pull out and answer? And then we want to make sure we save at least 20 minutes for the breakout groups.
So we had a few questions in there about whether a local government could sort of re-grant out the funds and use them in, say, a house of worship or a school or a nonprofit. And my understanding is yes. However, that would likely require you to do the sort of the full grant instead of the voucher option. Julie and Joanne, does that sound right to you, at least for the formula grants?
Yes, that's an eligible activity. But right, for the direct grants, it would be a voucher or a blueprint. And I want to, again, have the caveat that the reporting on that might be, there'll be a lot of reporting involved. There's Buy American, Build American, there's Davis-Bacon, there's prevailing wage, there's a lot of things involved with administering a federal grant. So one, make sure that communities that are interested in doing that understand what those are, and go to the DOE website and read through the requirements. But that is an eligible activity.
Yep.
Yeah, they do emphasize on the program guidance that if you want to have a partner help you with the program, the maximum amount you can use for that is 20% of your funding, or $250,000, whichever is greater. So if you want to have a non-governmental organization assist you in implementing your program, that's the maximum amount of funding you could share there. And then they also say a maximum of 10% of your funding can be used for program administration. And I think this can be a topic for the small groups, but we do have a really robust Mass Save incentive program for energy efficiency in the Commonwealth, if you are not an MLP, a municipal light plant community. And so since the EECBG funding is relatively small, we're not sure that using the funding for those purposes would go as far as perhaps other program options you may want to consider. So that's something I think for communities to discuss and think about as well.
I think we also had a couple folks asking about regional school districts, and my understanding is that the local governments, so let's take Acton Boxborough, for example. If Acton and or Boxborough wanted to apply for funds through DOER, for example, I think because both of them are under the population limit for the formula grants, they could apply individually or together as a team and use those funds for an energy retrofit at a school building or something like that. Does that sound right to you, Joanne?
That does, and I want to get clarification from DOE on whether like the town of Boxborough and the town of Acton would submit separate There'll be one point of contact, so the grant would go through one, but whether it could be an allocation for both communities. So that would be eligible, but yeah.
But important to note, I think we got this question from Kate Crosby at Acton Boxborough. The regional school district staff from the district can't apply without the municipal government being the sort of primary applicant.
Correct. That's my understanding.
Okay. So I think with that we should move into breakouts. So Francelli's, Julie,
actually pull up. There's a slide. Maybe we could share what they are. Sure.
Pull that up.
Maybe before that, just wanted to share with folks the contact information slide and emphasize, if you are a community over 35,000 residents, we encourage you to ask questions directly to the Department of Energy. We can do our best to answer based on what we've read in the materials, but they're the ultimate arbiters of this program. So this is their email address, and we can put that in the chat as well. For the program for under 35,000, again, Joanne emphasized that timeline. They'll apply for the funds by July. It will take through the fall to get that funding from the Department of Energy. So they anticipate launching a program in early 2024. So you're welcome to email green.communities@mass.gov if you have any questions right now.